interest in the panelists. We're going to start in 1 minute, but if y'all would come a little closer, that would make it a little cozier if you'd like. So we're going to start in 1 minute.
Some of us are starting to go deaf.
Okay.
We try. So let's get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming. My name is Michael DiResto. I have the pleasure to be the director of the Reilly Center for Media and Public Affairs at the LSU Manship School of Mass Communication. Before we begin tonight's conversation, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. First, please silence your phones. We do encourage posting on social media, so feel free to tweet, Instagram, Snapchat your experience tonight. Don't forget to tag us. Second, we will have time later in the panel for audience questions, so we ask that you hold your questions until that time. But before jumping in, I'd want to take a moment just to set the stage for our discussion by stating the obvious, namely that Katrina was terrible and awful and devastating. And I say this as someone who experienced Katrina from here in Baton Rouge. At the time of the storm and during the recovery, I worked as press secretary for Congressman Richard Baker. It was my job to get reliable information to the people, and well, I worked for the federal government, so it didn't go all that well all the time. Remember, this was a time before Wi-Fi, and this was a time when cell towers had either been destroyed or they were being overwhelmed by population shifts. And communication was difficult, and getting true and accurate information was as life-saving as it was arduous, which is why the work of our panelists and so many other journalists who were on the ground was so vital. Katrina caused great suffering, but also inspired sacrifice in the service of others under extraordinary circumstances. This evening, we gather to help remember and celebrate their service. With that, I'd like to invite up the Dean of the Manship School, Dr. Kim Bissell, to say a few words.
Thank you for the introduction, Michael. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I think I'm going to request for everyone to come forward. I see all the movement going on. Take your time. We'll wait. It is a true pleasure on behalf of the Manship School to welcome you here tonight to one of the Reilly Center's amazing events that they'll have throughout the academic year. It's powerful to look around this room with the students and the faculty and the journalists and the community members and see how a story as impactful as Hurricane Katrina continues to resonate 20 years later. I was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama 20 years ago, and while we didn't face nearly what New Orleans and the surrounding area faced, we still experienced it in a different way. This conversation that you're about to hear tonight certainly matters, not just because of what happened in 2005, but because of what we can learn from it today, about the role of journalism, the urgency of communication during a crisis, and the power of storytelling in shaping how we remember these events, and certainly the mark it leaves in history. I want to give thanks to Professor Lisa Page, basically the brainchild behind this whole event. Her vision and her leadership brought this project to life. Oh, sorry about that.
If they were closer, they could hear.
That's great. 10 points for the gentleman in the purple shirt. Thank you. I do want to give special thanks to Professor Lisa Page, whose senior journalism students conducted in-depth reporting. I'm sorry. Like this. In-depth reporting and interviews with the journalists that you'll hear from tonight. For our students, it was a chance to learn directly from the people who lived and reported this event for history and for us. And it's a chance to reflect, see, oh, the microphone, oh, my glasses, it's a mess. It's a chance for us, it's a chance to reflect on how to prepare our future storytellers. We're also grateful for the Reilly Center's team for coordinating this event, and to our panelists for taking the time to share their moments in history and their insight. I'd also like to give a special thanks to the Honors College for welcoming us into their space and this made tonight's event possible. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Page, who's going to lead the discussion. Thank you all.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Well, first of all, thanks to Dean Bissell for that wonderful introduction, and thanks to all of you for being here tonight. I'm just extremely grateful that you're here. I want to say a special thanks to the 16 journalists who agreed to be interviewed by my senior capstone students. Many of them couldn't make it tonight, but a couple of them did, and you'll meet them in a little bit. But I say thank you to them and to my students. 2 of my students are here tonight, and you'll also meet them. So let's start first with some introductions of our panel. We have, to my immediate left, John Pope, who was a reporter during Hurricane Katrina. And to his left, Jarvis DeBerry, who was an editorial writer. And then Kathy Anderson, who was a photographer, and also John McCusker, who was a photographer. Let's give them a round of applause. I also want to recognize a couple of other journalists who agreed to be interviewed by my students who were able to make it tonight. So we have Ted Jackson, who was a photographer. Stand up and let them see you, Ted. And Doug McCash, who was an art critic. And Doug Parker is Kathy Anderson. He's married to Kathy Anderson. He was also a photographer at the paper at the time. He was photo editor, I'm sorry. Okay, right? And 2 of my former students who did the interviews were able to make it as well. Chloe Richmond and Zachary Tumanello. They did a great job. So let's jump right into this discussion. Let's start on Sunday night. It's Sunday night, August 28th, 20 years ago, and Hurricane Katrina is heading toward New Orleans. A group of journalists have agreed to stay behind at the paper to be in place to help cover it as soon as the hurricane passes. So they stay in the newsroom, and some of them have brought their family members along. So can you set the scene for us? What was it like in the newsroom? Did people seem particularly worried that this was the hurricane that we'd all heard would someday devastate New Orleans? We're gonna have to pass the mic around.
Right. Well, can you hear me? Good. When I think about that night, I think about the passengers on the Titanic before the ship hit the iceberg. Because they were having a fine time, and we were chatting and schmoozing. I remember talking about the comparative merits of coffee makers. There was some good cheese. I think someone sneaked in wine. And we were partying. I mean, we'd all been through hurricanes. And so we just thought, no big deal. I had bought, I think, 3 changes of underwear and a few shirts and an umbrella. And I was just ready for not to stay there long and go back home. I mean, who knew? And it started raining at about 5 in the morning. And I was sleeping under a desk in the features department next to the windows. And the wind was blowing the rain so hard that the rain was going sideways, and the plate glass windows were turned into parabolas by the force of the wind. And it was pretty awful. We were blogging like crazy because we had set up in the photo lab a windowless room with generators to power fans, computers, and so we would go in there and take turns blogging. And just, the beauty of blogs, I learned then, was you don't need to have a complete, beautiful, well-formed story. You just send out bits of information. And that's the way we worked.
Anybody else?
I think I had a little bit of a different experience than Pope, in that I was worried about what was going to happen. Not that we didn't have moments of fun and foolishness on that Saturday night, but the hours and the day or so leading up to that, the warnings were becoming more and more strident, especially from Mayor Ray Nagin and from all the public officials. And so I lived in Gentilly on Crescent Street or Crescent Drive. I could never figure out which it was supposed to be. It seems to use them interchangeably in New Orleans, but it was right across the street from Redeemer Seton High School then. And so I would typically get to the Times-Picayune by driving up Broad almost all the way to the newspaper. And I remember right there at Broad and Canal at about 3 o'clock that afternoon, the homeless woman who was always at that Rite Aid on the sidewalk was sitting there on the sidewalk where she always was. And I just remember being terrified at what was going to happen, not just to her, but to other people that you could see lining up around the Superdome because they didn't have any way out of the city. So I was worried. I wasn't expecting everything that happened to happen, but there was this kind of buildup of tension and anxiety that, you know, people, and I should say, this is something I feel I have to say, at about 3:30 p.m. on Friday afternoon, August 26th, the then editor of the paper, Jim Amos, walks into the editorial page office and he asked those of us on the editorial board, are you all worried about this hurricane? And as if in chorus, we all said, what hurricane? He said, Hurricane Katrina. I said, oh, that's supposed to loop up and hit Apalachicola, Florida. That's not coming to us. He said, oh, well, that might not be the case anymore. We will learn something within the next 30 minutes that will give us a more definitive answer. So I need people to understand that school let out Friday afternoon where people had no concept that a dangerous hurricane was headed to New Orleans. And yet, on that Saturday morning, the highways were clogged with people trying to get out of town. So in the space of, say, 12 to 14 hours, and I don't know what you all remember, it was a madhouse in New Orleans with people trying to get out of the city. So I carried quite a bit of anxiety with me to the paper.
Can you hear me? By the time Katrina hit, I had been at the paper for 24 years, covered many hurricanes. I knew the drill. Our kids were 8 and 9 years old. My daughter's birthday, her 10th birthday was August 29th. So on the Saturday, the 28th, she had a birthday party with 2 other girls from her class at a swimming pool. And all the other parents at the party were evacuating right from the birthday party. We were the only ones that stayed. So Sunday, I kind of waited until like really late, till the mandatory, where we had to get off the streets to bring the girls to the paper. And I really just packed a bag for a couple of days with their stuff. I thought, I didn't really have, I should have had, but I didn't have the anxiety about it. I knew it was going to be big. But the Times-Picayune building is a concrete steel reinforced building with a backup generator, which I did not know didn't include air conditioning. Out there. But we came in with the girls, and for them, they've done this before. The routine, stay at the paper a couple nights and come home. So to them, they weren't panicked either. It was more, and there were other kids there. So I think that Sunday, I was pretty relaxed. I mean, I was ready to do whatever it was. You know, we just hung out. I think the power went out at night, sometime during the night where it got really hot. At about 5 in the morning. And I did wake up and, you know, hear all the wind and watch watch those windows in the living section bowing back and forth, but they held. So that was the scene for Sunday. John.
At the time Katrina hit, I had been at the paper on staff 19 years. I had been hanging around generally. I was like a bad penny. They couldn't get rid of me since about 1983. My wife was also a 20-year veteran of the paper at that time. And she, the night before the storm, the Saturday you're talking about, drove all the way to Birmingham to drop our 11 and 9-year-old daughters off there. Drove back. Our 16-year-old wanted to stay with us. So they all went to the paper in their car, and then I think Doug had me doing something, because we're doing all this prep pictures, so you get people boarding up and all, you're talking about it being different from the others. There was a routine. There is a way that you cover a hurricane. There's the stuff you do when it's coming, the stuff they do the night it's hitting, yada, yada, yada. The problem was the morning after was different on this one. But that being said, we also had a bad feeling. I'm a native. I grew up with hurricanes. My wife was the same, but we had a bad feeling about this. And just a note about Jarvis, and just talking about the way that we see things and look at this event historically. What do you remember everybody saying that first week? How could they stay? How could those people stay? Well, that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is in 36 hours' time, hundreds of thousands of people got on the road and out of harm's way from Southeast Louisiana. If there are any history majors out there that can name me a larger civilian evacuation in American history in a shorter period of time, I'm all ears. That's what people forget. And one of the, for a state that's not known for really successful top-down programs, or even trying to start any, the contraflow process that had begun and really started to get its legs, if a road can have legs, didn't happen until the mid-1990s. So I would submit to you that if Hurricane Katrina had happened in 1985, not only would there have been more than 40,000 people in the city of New Orleans, the casualties would have been off the chain.
So Hurricane Katrina hits before daybreak on August 29. The winds are howling. A window in one of the executive offices shatters. And at some point, the winds die down. And the journalists start to venture out. John, you were one of the first journalists to sort of get out in your truck. Can you tell me what you saw initially? And at what point did you realize that things were going to get much worse?
Well,
that there was an issue with the levees and a flood wall?
I made,
Hold on for a second, we need you to talk in the
I can speak in my full tenor.
I made 3 trips out that day. The first one, you say about the winds dying down, or so we thought.
Yeah.
Greg Thomas, a business writer, and I, got out of my Tacoma. The water still wasn't that high, so, we got up on the Broad Street overpass, went down by the Superdome, and the phones weren't working. And just young people understand, the iPhone had not been invented yet. When I say phone, we're talking about Motorola Razors. If you want to type a C in a text message, you've got to hit A 3 times. Okay. So what does Greg do? He hops out of the car and runs to the Superdome. So I'm just like stuck there. And I don't want to just sit there and not do anything waiting for him. So I went down Poydras Street. I saw that the Hyatt Regency looked like a smashed bottle that hadn't quite fallen apart yet. Made some pictures of that. And right then, this feeder band comes in. We thought it was over, but no, there's more. And this feeder band came in, and then all the loosened windows on the buildings surrounding on Poydras Street started falling and blowing up like I was being shelled. And I got back in my truck, as one does, and I was able to get back to the Superdome and get up under the overhang there until I could find Greg Thomas. And right around the time we get back to the paper, I think I just finished cursing him out.
What I remember is at about 2 o'clock, when I think the winds had finally died down. The plan was that we would split up as reporters and photographers and climb into the newspapers' delivery trucks, which we thought were high enough to make it through the water. And then we would fan out across the city and see what we could see. And there was a truck ahead of the one I was on. Gwen Filosa was a reporter then. She and I were on a truck, and we were supposed to go and see what had happened in Eastern New Orleans, as was our style to say that. We wouldn't say New Orleans East, but New Orleans East is where we were going, and or where we were planning on going. And so we were on the truck that was supposed to go to the east, and a truck that left 5 minutes ahead of us was supposed to go to St. Bernard Parish. So we gingerly navigate Howard Avenue, come around Xavier, get up onto the interstate, and we are coming around the curve of the Superdome when we see that the truck that set out ahead of us has turned around and is coming back directly toward us.
On the same side.
On the same side, not on the opposite side of the interstate, but on the same side. And so the drivers pull up next to each other. What are you doing? He said, well, man, you can't get past the high rise in New Orleans. All of that is underwater. And our driver says, well, my house is in the east. I'm trying to get there. And he says, oh man, all that's underwater. But even then, we continued to drive to see how far we could get. We stopped at various points along the way. Is everyone here generally familiar with the layout and topography of New Orleans? Raise your hand if you're not, and that's okay. So if you are driving on I-10 in New Orleans, the interstate is elevated. It is above the city. And so we got out and we were able to look down and see people in real distress and harm. This is in the afternoon. There are people who are in boats. There are people on rooftops. There are people, one man in particular I remember had his arms around a water cooler, the likes of which you might see in a dugout for Little League. And he was using that to try to stay afloat. So this is around somewhere between 2 and 3 p.m. that Monday afternoon.
In answer about just to kind of interject about, we went back out a third time, and I went with Mike Perlstein, and by this time the water was too high to get out in the vehicle. So we waded over the Broad Street overpass, went up on top, and when we got to the top and looked down in downtown New Orleans at Tulane and Broad, all we saw was water. So this is 5 o'clock on Monday. Something's clearly wrong. It hadn't rained. You know, we went down and made pictures. We went back and reported what we had seen. But we still did not definitively see a broken levee. We didn't see a rush of water. We just knew that it had rained in hours and Tulane and Broad was underwater.
On Monday, I think when the winds went down, I went out twice. First, earlier in the afternoon, and there was a lot of damage. I had trees down, poles down, a lot of damage. There was water on the road, but it was navigable. I went for a little while. I came back to the paper, went back out around 7 p.m. in a truck. That's when I saw the water. People were wading through Tulane Avenue, water's up to the knees. I went into Holly Grove. I think there's a picture up there where people are in their doorways looking out into the water. It was up about the first step of their raised houses. And I didn't know that was coming. I had no idea how widespread it was, but we were getting reports. Ted Jackson had gone out early and made it to the 9th Ward, and he had pictures of the house, of water up to the roofs. Doug McCash went out with another editor into Lakeview, and he came back and told us about water in Lakeview. And then we were getting reports from all the reporter sources were coming in. So slowly, by the end of the day on Monday, late Monday, we knew that there was a pretty much widespread, but we really didn't know the total destruction until the next day.
I was writing about medicine then, and about 2:30 that afternoon, I got a call from Mercy Hospital, which is next to Bayou St. John. And this man said, "Pope, why is Bayou St. John overflowing?" And I said, "Gee, I didn't know. We did not know about the levee breach." And I reported that to my editor. We blogged everything. And then I started feeling, and it spread through the newsroom, this fear, anxiety, anger, that every level of government, city, state, federal, had let us down. And we were cast adrift. It was a scary feeling, and we were in the paper. We had no power, but the cafeteria was just trying to cook up its inventory. It was like someone said, it was like being on the cruise ship from hell. It kept on doling out food, and we didn't know how long we'd be able to stay there.
I'm gonna throw this question to you, Doug. I know you weren't on the panel, but Doug McCash and James O'Byrne went out on their bikes early in the day, and you were the ones to report back that something terrible was happening. Can you tell us about that moment?
James and I had learned over the years that you can get around better on a bicycle after a storm. There are limbs down and power lines and such. And we were hearing a lot of things, and we had heard that there was a lighthouse on fire out at the lakefront north of us, and we took off in that direction. And by the time we got about halfway there, we ran into water flowing down Canal Street or up Canal Street in a way that we hadn't predicted at all. And it told us that something had happened down there, doubtlessly a levee break, and that the center of the city was also filling up. And so then we came back and reported on that.
So now everybody realizes that the worst hasn't passed, that things are going to get much worse. So the journalists spend Monday night in the Times-Picayune newsroom. Early Tuesday morning, at some point, Kathy, you make your way up to the top of the Times-Picayune building. What motivated you to go up there? What did you see when you got there? And what was happening when you came back down those stairs?
So when I woke up Tuesday, I looked out the window of the living section, and I saw that the cars were underwater. And I looked at my kids; they were asleep under our society writer's desk, fast asleep. So I went to the executive office and I got the key. The Times-Picayune building had a tower on top of it. So it was a three-story building that had a tower with these spiraling staircase that you climbed up, and then you unlocked a padlock, and you went through the hatch. And then you could have a 360 view of the whole city. So I got the key, and it's completely dark. There's no lights. I didn't even have a flashlight back then. I can't remember. And I went through the hatch, and that's when I saw the total devastation. The people walking on the interstate. I saw fire in the distance. I saw the damage to the Superdome, and I was just shooting like 360, like going around and around, and it was kind of disbelief, and I was up there for a while. When I came back down, like everybody's gone. I'm like, what happened? And in the meantime, I was like, I had no idea that our publisher, you had a mandatory evacuation of the building. He said the water was rising, there was rumors that the prisoners were breaking out of jail across the street. So everyone was loading up into these delivery trucks, and they're high up off the ground. And the editor of the paper asked me if I would stay and shoot pictures of people loading up. So Doug and our kids got on another truck, and I was behind them. And it was kind of a wild time because these trucks were driving through 4 feet of water, and I wasn't even sure if it was going to make it. I think I had a picture up here on the way out from the truck of a baby being passed over a fence. That was from Howard Avenue. That was 3 blocks from our building. So it was kind of a wild time, on our way to Baton Rouge, which we landed at LSU. So we can talk about that later, I think.
So the publisher evacuates the building, gets all of the journalists onto these newspaper delivery trucks. Some of them decide to stop on the West Bank, at the West Bank Bureau. And at that point, a small group of journalists and an editor make a stunning decision. John McCusker, can you take us there at that moment? They're on the West Bank.
Sure.
Some of the trucks just kept riding on to Baton Rouge and Houma.
I should say we got on those trucks thinking that we were all going to stop on the West Bank, and then that's not what happened.
Next time, this is the Chattanooga choo-choo before you get on. There were a number of us that before the evacuation even took place were back in the library plotting. Two things can be true. The evacuation had to happen. The water was coming out. I took off in my kayak that morning. When she was going up in the tower, I was going out in a kayak. And just in the half hour I was out, when I came back, the water had come up that much more on the front steps of the paper. So our publisher, Ashton Phelps, absolutely made the right call, because it wasn't just journalists. Who cares about us? But we had grannies, we had children, we had pets.
No pets on this one.
Oh, they were in our truck.
Oh, in your truck.
Oh yeah, they were in our truck. That was something else I was smelling, I don't know. But he made the right call getting us out of there. But at the same time, there were a number of us that were going, it's the biggest story in the world. We're not leaving. We're the paper of New Orleans. We're not going and watching this on television for the next month. And that tension's going back and forth. So finally what happens in the parking lot at the West Bank Bureau is Jim Amos is talked into putting together a volunteer group only. And David Meeks, who was our sports editor, asked for volunteers, and I guess about 7 or 8 of us, not the smart ones, but about 7 or 8 of us stayed, and it was kind of us that covered the storm that first week. So when everybody else went on to Houma and then Baton Rouge, my wife and son included, your children included, we went right back into the city.
Just to say that in addition to that, we had people that didn't leave. Pat Jackson, I think, was still in the city and vote. We had a photographer, Alex Brandon, embedded with the police. Everybody, all the other photographers were where they were supposed to be, like on the North Shore to cover that. So they were strategically placed all throughout the city.
And God bless them, we abandoned Tremaine Lee at City Hall.
So Ted Jackson was decided on his own that he wasn't going to get the photographers were getting on the trucks, and he decided on his own that he wasn't going to get on that truck. Can you tell us about that moment?
My wife's not here to hear it.
Stand up.
Yeah, that was a crazy moment with everybody evacuating to the loading dock, and I remember our director of photography, Doug Parker, coming rushing up and saying, "Ted, we want you in the front seat and shoot pictures on the way out." And I said, "I'm not getting on the truck." And he said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I have no idea." And so he said, "Just be careful, be careful." And so I went down to the hallway on the first floor, and everybody's gone now. And I look to the front door, and I see nothing but water. Look at the back door, I see a John boat pulled up on the back porch. And I said to myself, I think I may have said it out loud, I said, if there's a motor on that boat, I'm gonna take it. And then Ashton went running by and he said, "Ted, get on the truck." And he disappeared into the loading dock. And I rushed back to the back porch, and there was no motor, but there was a broken broom. And, I said, "God just sent me a boat." And that broom is in a museum in Washington, D.C. today. So I paddled away on my own and sat under a tree thinking, "Oh my goodness, what am I going to do now?" As the trucks plow through the water. And I said, "This is not the smartest thing I've ever done." And I decided if I see someone in the water, I'm going to rescue them with the boat. If I don't, if they're on rooftops or dry land, I'll leave them for others to rescue, because they'll end up taking the boat from me. And I paddled out, and immediately I saw a head bobbing in the water. And I yelled out, I said, "Are you okay?" And the head turned, and it was Alex Brandon swimming away from the paper. And so we continued on and found resources and tried to continue covering the story.
So you got rid of the boat and you kept the broom?
Now, keep in mind that they stayed in a city that was not functioning. And when they decided to stay in the city, they had no idea where they were gonna sleep, where they were gonna eat, how they were gonna eat, where they were gonna find water, okay? But they made it work. John, you were on the back of that truck, one of those trucks. Tell us what that experience was like for you.
In case any of you might have wondered, riding in a delivery truck in South Louisiana in the dead of August is no fun. It was hot, it was humid, and there were two people whom I shall not name on my truck. I thought they were going to die from exposure. It was grim. And we just kept going. I mean, if nature called, everything stopped. We went to the side of the road. There was no shame, no modesty. Just had to do it. And we kept on going, and we were woozy, we were tired, all these emotions. We were tired, we were anxious, we were what about our families? And on we went to Baton Rouge. We were exhausted when we got there, but Peter Kovacs was saying, "Pope, get to work." So I was a medical reporter, so I went down to PMAC, the Pete Maravich Assembly Center, and there was a field house next to it, and choppers were bringing in bodies, bringing in people on the practice field. And I felt like Scarlett O'Hara in the depot and Gone with the Wind, because all these gurneys were going past me, left and right, with people just glassy-eyed with tubes coming out of their arms. And it was a madhouse, but they knew what they were doing. It just took a while to take it in. I found some of my sources who, bless their hearts, talked with me in the middle of all this going on, and then I went back and wrote. And again, it was doing what we did. I like to think that doing what we did helped keep some of us at least partially sane. There was a routine to get into, to keep up. Even though deadlines didn't mean much, we were just filing whenever we could. And then in Baton Rouge, we stayed in married student housing. Oh yeah. I said that those apartments could break up a marriage faster than infidelity. And we were there for a few ignominious days, and then we were told, The students want to live here, they're thinking, why? So I got a tip from our real estate guy about a realtor in Baton Rouge, and I was pumping gas, and I found the realtor who had a house that was in succession. So the utilities and water were still going. So 4 days after I had evacuated in a truck with my gym bag and an umbrella, I was negotiating to buy a house. It was a crazy time. But I called it the Pope Home for Vagabond Journalists. We had, I think, 7 grown-ups, 2 teenagers, and 1 anxious cat. It was what we did. And I got donations, got food, flatware, and I gave it to people who had been flooded out. One woman, Karen Turney Bazile, bless her heart, still has the gumbo pot I gave her. She had 7 feet of water in her home in St. Bernard, and she calls that pot the gumbo pot of love.
I'll take it. How did you guys keep working? Jarvis, at one point, you realized your home was probably underwater. Kathy, at one point, you and Doug had to decide to send your children away to relatives. John McCusker, you lost your home. Pope, you were separated from the love of your life for a long time. How did you guys keep doing such stellar journalism under those excruciating circumstances?
To quote Mel Brooks, fear. We had to do it. It was what we did for a living. And as I said earlier, I think there was safety and perhaps sanity in routine. And after a while, we kind of got into a rhythm. And we were in the Banqueray Business Center, which was an old shopping mall, which we called the Bunker. We were working on long tables with cell phones and laptops. And I was thinking, well, we were writing for ourselves also. Like, I was thinking, where are my doctors? Where the hell are my doctors? Well, I found out, and I started calling around. Doctors do not have to tell people they're evacuating. So I found the president of the AMA in Tupelo and talked to him about that. Then medical records. My wife and I had gone to an eye doctor in Lakeview. Our records were in Lake Pontchartrain. I wrote about medical records and how computer records were just, who knew from computer records then? And it was just telling the situation that existed, and like throwing a bottle with a message in the ocean. Maybe somebody might pay attention and do something about it. But my wife, who was in Atlanta with her college roommate, told me that she was reading NOLA.com. We were getting, I was told, 30 million hits a day on our website. And like a bulletin board, people were saying, hey, I'm in the 900 block of something or other. Tell me where you live, I will check your house to see how it's doing. Our neighbor, bless her heart, had been through coups in Liberia. This was no big deal to her. She stayed, and she said, if you can get a key to me, I will send my son around to clean out your refrigerators. Yes, our refrigerator and our freezer survived Katrina. We appreciated that because there was, I don't know how familiar you are with Lakeview, but there's this big median, we call it a neutral ground, between Pontchartrain Boulevard and West End Boulevard. After the storm, blocks upon blocks upon blocks upon blocks of dead refrigerators. It was sobering. And we just kept on trying to find out what we would want to know and what, by extension, we thought people might need to know. And sometimes it was tough. I remember being on a conference call with the Health Centers for Disease Control, and she stopped everything and said, John, you can't imagine what you've been through. Whereupon I started crying. We all cried a lot. In those days, it was just, and like Susan Langenhenning had been at dive with the aquarium. She got a call that all the fish had died because the power was out. She fell apart. And people would call, between stories, they would call their homes or their insurers or their contractors. Invariably, people hung up in tears. We would gather around, cry, hug, and then go back to work.
Jarvis?
to answer your question, Lisa, it took a kind of compartmentalization, which I think is also equal to a kind of emotional detachment. So I was standing on Interstate 10 and I said out loud, okay, my house is probably gone. And I was trying to free myself up. It's like free up the mental space. I can't worry about what might have happened. I can't be wondering how many deep water I got. I can't be concerned about those things or like individual, like what happened to me in my house and my things. Like I gotta like keep my focus on what I'm seeing in front of me to report these things. Unlike John, I think I held a lot of stuff in and didn't have, I don't mean that as a knock, I'm just being like,
that's a
really,
beautifully
really,
polite way of putting it, my dear
really,
friend.
really, really honest. And I will tell you, there was a documentary crew from London that interviewed me about that day, August 29th in 2022. It was like a Jazz Fest day in 2022. And I'm recounting the story I've just told you about standing on the interstate and looking down and seeing people in distress. And it was at that moment that I cried. I mean, 17 years have passed, and it occurred to me in that moment, I don't know if those people survived or not. I don't know if I saw their final moments or if they are now telling a story about how they survived. And the emotional weight of all of that like hit me then. But in the moment, with the adrenaline pumping, with the need to try to tell the story, I felt like I couldn't allow myself to feel the emotions that I otherwise would have felt.
I think as a journalist, like you train your whole life for something like the big story of Katrina. So we were ready. What none of us were ready to be part of the story you were covering, and that one was different. And when we got to Baton Rouge, spent the first night in the marriage student houses with other journalists, sleeping on the floor, and Doug ended up going to the home of Bill Five, a Baton Rouge advocate photographer. So he took Doug and the girls, and the next day I joined them. I was with John. I was photographing helicopters landing near the track and field and the PMAC. The next day, I ended up talking to my father, who was a Marquette Journalism School graduate, and he said, "We got this. You can send your kids here." Like I had 3 sisters. One of them had kids the same age as mine. We'd just been visiting. So we made the decision to put them on the plane, and they lived with my youngest sister for 5 months. And that was a godsend. It's like you don't realize how thankful you are and have the family you do. But it was the best thing for them to be far away from all of the destruction. Their school had 9 feet of water. We didn't even know how our house did. In fact, I went back in with the Army National Guard, and I was in a helicopter, and the pilot, he had flown after 9/11 over the Pentagon. I was talking to him. He said, "How's your house?" I said, "I have no idea." And he said, "Well, let's go." And he flew over my house, and I could see that the roof was intact, but I didn't really know, anything else. But at least we had a roof, and I said, "Well, okay, it's still there." Compared to the rest of the stuff I was photographing, which was slabs and just houses floating, I felt extremely fortunate. So I really think the most difficult part for me, just psychologically, wasn't in the first few weeks. You're just still on adrenaline. It was a year and a half of coverage, of driving down the street to get to work down Carrollton Avenue and seeing all the refrigerators, and nothing was getting better. Every single story was about Katrina. And I remember months after going through a story that it really wasn't directly Katrina related, and this woman just started sobbing, and she grabbed me, and I was holding her, and I'm thinking, I'm not a therapist. This has nothing to do, but I just sat there with her for like 10 minutes. And I think that started to take a toll on me after a while. So I didn't really feel it till many months later, when I started to kind of really feel it.
Well, of course, y'all are talking about Baton Rouge. I'm still in New Orleans through Wednesday, so Tuesday, after we went back in, we photographed the looting at the Walmart, went to the lower Ninth Ward, got people coming out of there. And then we went to Algiers and broke into the house that I grew up in, my parents' old house, because it wasn't wet over there. We didn't know if the water was still going up. And it was a rather Fellini-esque experience seeing all of the people I worked with in the house I grew up with. It was like a weird dream you would have after you ate something funny. But we went back in the next day, we split into teams. We'd stashed some cars around the city. So we retrieved those cars and went around, and we broke up into teams. Tremaine Lee had only been at the paper like 4 months at that point, and he said, we left him at City Hall, and he gets word that the paper has evacuated. And he's like, hey, Tremaine, your boys took a powder on you. So one of the first things we had to do when we get back into the city was to go get Tremaine. We sort of joke about what our mashup of Katrina was. I talk about Naked and Afraid with a little bit of Apollo 13 mixed in, but Tremaine had it rough because he had Home Alone in his mashup too. But Jarvis had something that I think is really important, and since this is we are talking to young journalists, and congratulations on being young. The journalism, you're on your own. But I want you to think about something, because I see journalists doing this, and look, this is my soapbox, give me 30 seconds. A lot of times I see it, and I think this is something that happens particularly with young journalists, and it may just be a matter of life experience, but it may just be a matter of this, we get bombarded with this so much when we watch coverage of events like this. When you're a reporter, well, let's turn this around. I want you to think about the worst event in your life, the worst thing that ever happened to you. And then imagine someone asking you, well, do you think you're someday going to have closure on that? Are you going to get over that? Are you going to get past that? And the reason I say this is because how many times have you seen a report from a trial or a big event and said, well, she's still a murder victim, but at least the family's got justice, okay? I'm just going to encourage young journalists, don't make that value judgment. And don't make aspirational pronouncements about other people's grief. They don't have to have closure, and guess what? Chances are, if it's bad enough, they never will. And one of the first things you learn if you were treated for trauma is not to think in aspirational terms like that, because there's a very good chance, depending on what you've gone through, that the best you can hope for in life is to learn to live with it tomorrow and the next day.
With so much suffering all around during Katrina, and just such uncertainty about whether national leaders even understood what was happening, what responsibility did you all feel, number one, to help get relief efforts to the city, and number two, to get the story right? Because there were a lot of wild rumors circulating during this time.
Oh yes, I was a medical reporter then, and there were rumors of diphtheria and other ghastly everything. Toxic gumbo. Remember toxic gumbo?
Toxic stew.
Yeah. And my editor would come and say, "Oh, why don't we have this?" I said, "Because it doesn't exist." These people were parachuting in. They saw a possible headline for a really good story, and they thought, wow, this is terrific. And they would send out their story and then leave. And I felt like the little man in the circus who cleans up after the elephants. Because I had to explain this is not true. And you just make sure you get it right. And then, okay, personal bias here. My wife was one of the women drafted to form Women of the Storm, which was a about 150 women, all from all shapes, all parts of New Orleans, all socioeconomic levels, who went to Washington to lobby for aid. And to get the Congress people to come down to New Orleans, excuse me, to see what had happened, because the mantra of the group was, you can't appreciate until you've seen it. So being married to a Woman of the Storm was a good thing, because they were assiduous, and as Ann Milling, the founder, said, we nag. They issue invitations to come down, and we nag.
I was at Manship that Saturday afternoon when Terry Troncali, the editorial page editor, who had been with you all in New Orleans, came to me. I'm going to try to clean up her language since there are young people in the room. But she sat down next to me and says, I'm calling BS. They say they can't get to New Orleans. They say they can't reach us. They say they can't rescue us. BS, BS, BS. Again, I'm cleaning up her language. Can you write that? And I said, I'll try. And so my task, my assignment that Saturday afternoon was to write the editorial that appeared in Sunday's paper. We were printing again. Appeared in Sunday's paper, basically demanding aid for New Orleans from President George W. Bush. And I will say, in full disclosure, that I wrote the editorial just like I would write any other editorial, same editorial style, same editorial voice, etc. And Ashton Phelps, the publisher, who was about to get on a plane to go, I think, up to New Jersey, thought the editorial was a bit too hot, and conferred with me, Jim Amos, and Terry Troncali to see if they could, tone it down just a little bit. Jim Amos takes it and makes it even hotter by switching the typical voice of an editorial into the second person. So now we're speaking directly to the President of the United States and telling him that he needs to bring aid down to New Orleans. And I remember very distinctly Terry Troncali saying to Jim Amos, I don't care if I get fired over this. And I was like, wait, did you all ask me if I care if I'm gonna get fired? Anyway, the editorial ran, the much hotter version of that editorial ran on that Sunday. And to answer your question, we felt it was our responsibility as the newspaper in New Orleans to demand aid for New Orleans. And it made me question some of the kind of tenets of objectivity the journalists are told we're supposed to have. We were not unbiased on the question of whether New Orleans should survive or not. We were not objective as to whether, the city should be rebuilt or not, or if you all should have lived there or not. We were very passionate and unapologetically passionate about the city of New Orleans, its survival, and the people who live there. And I think all of us, journalists, in one way or another, felt a responsibility not just to report on New Orleans, but also to defend it.
Matt?
And our friend, I just have to chime in. Our friend Natalie Pompilio said, I don't know anyone who's pro-hurricane.
Just as a journalist and a photographer, I naively thought, when the rest of the world sees all these pictures, not just the collection of pictures from all the photographers in coverage, surely those in charge are going to do something immediately. I really thought, okay, this is going to create an impact. So disappointed that it took so long.
I think, just in case anyone, it's always good to get a few data points in here. Does anybody know how many days it was after the levees failed before the 101st Airborne arrived in New Orleans? 5 days. 5 days of people starving, 5 days of people with nothing to drink, 5 days with people with no shelter. And meanwhile, they've got helicopters going overhead, taking pictures of people on grocery stores like they're anthills, and the Bush administration said, well, we can't go in there, it's lawless. It was, to my mind, the first time in American history that we had a disaster situation and the people were being blamed for their victimhood.
I just want to say this one thing about these rumors of the lawlessness. I was working, so I wasn't watching the news. And my sister called me, and I was about to get on a helicopter, and she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm getting on a helicopter at the Army National Guard." She said, "You can't do that. They're shooting at helicopters." And I said, "No, they're not." And I guess I didn't know. And it just baffles my mind that all these rumors got out there and people believed them.
Raping babies.
That's the point I make in my column on Friday for MSNBC.com. Just the willingness of people to believe the most preposterous things. Why would people in need of rescue be trying to bring down the helicopters coming to rescue them? Likely trying to make noise to attract the helicopter, but no, not trying to shoot down the helicopters.
I came away from Katrina with this belief: forget objectivity. As I've told my friend Bruce Shapiro, head of the Dark Center for Journalism and Trauma, you're objective when you're dead. I'll go for fair. And that's what we were doing. Again, as Natalie said, I'm the only one who's pro-hurricane. You tell the story, you tell what's out there, and that's all you can do. And you hope that it strikes a responsive chord or two.
Wow, we could go on like this for another hour, but I do want to give the audience a chance to ask questions. So this is your opportunity. If you have a burning question, please raise your hand. Yes.
So, Ms. Kathy, your pictures just really tell a story, and being a New Orleans native, it's wonderful. Did the Times-Picayune designers of the building have the forethought about what that tower might be used for? Or that just happened to be a happy coincidence for you?
I'm going to repeat the question so that we can have it recorded. So he complimented Kathy on her beautiful photos and asked
well,
if
impactful photos, not always beautiful.
Impactful photos, and asked if the Times-Picayune had any idea what that tower would be used for.
Picayune sticks
What year was it built? I don't.
57.
Yeah.
67.
I don't know what the purpose of the tower was. I always thought it was just an architectural detail. Yeah.
Yeah, it just had the
It had a clock on top of it. But I don't think it was meant as an observation tower. I had been up there many times taking pictures. So after the storm, that was just the logical place to go.
No, it was a symbol of the Times-Picayune.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
tower.
it was.
That's why they built it. Why they decided people could go up in it. Why not? I mean.
Well, the electricians had to go up to rewire the thing going around.
But it was a great spot to shoot the Superdome, all lit up for the Super Bowl and stuff like that. It was anytime you needed something of a skyline, it was perfect.
Okay, other questions? Yes.
We know that aid failed in certain ways and the government failed in a lot of ways. But from a journalistic standpoint, what areas have you noticed shifted from that time? Were there any key or significant changes to the field or the industry that have been lasting over time?
She says that, we know that that so many things failed. The government failed during Katrina. Have there been any lasting
changes in
Any
the
changes
field.
in journalism?
Yes.
Any changes in
That
journalism?
stem from the failures or stem from that experience.
Any changes from in journalism that stem from Hurricane Katrina?
I like to think we're more aggressive. We're asking tougher questions, politely, but we were asking tougher questions because this was our home we were concerned about. It wasn't just some distant concern, but I like to think we've gotten tougher.
I think my answer to that is because you can't really dictate a industry-wide change in journalism. There's no governing authority, really.
Yeah.
Touche. But I tell journalists that it is a glaring example of the need to be skeptical, even when you're talking to official sources. Because so much of the awful things that we were hearing that were happening in New Orleans were coming not just from random people, it was coming from the mayor and the police chief. So when you have the mayor saying that people in the Superdome have become, I quote, almost animalistic, end quote. And you have the police chief saying they're raping babies and they are trying to shoot down helicopters. Don't say, oh, well, it's official source said it, so it's gotta be true and I just reported. You have to push back on that. What evidence do you have of that? Have you seen that? You know, could it be that they are trying to make noise to, you know, so I think it's easier to make this case now during this presidential administration because I don't think anybody, I hope nobody will assert that the president of the United States doesn't lie and a lot and unapologetically. So I think journalists today can better understand, oh, just because an official source says that Haitians are eating cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio, doesn't make it true that that's what people are doing in Springfield, Ohio. I don't think that enough journalists then were skeptical enough, and because this is what we, even though we know we're supposed to be skeptical of everybody at all times, we tend to give a little more credence to what official sources tell us. And so that was a situation where just relying on the official sources was going to give you the wrong story and the wrong impression of what was happening. And so my lesson that I have told other journalists about is be skeptical with everybody and not just take it as truth just because someone who is supposed to be telling you the truth said it.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with the same thing. I think you're supposed to have 3 sources, and it wasn't 3 sources, but it was Katrina, and there were a lot of, there's a lack of communication, there were a lot of problems, but yeah, I think it could change things. And even from the officials themselves, I mean, they believed what they were, the falsehoods they were sharing, they believed it. So hopefully some of those people in power think twice about what they say. Make sure it's accurate before they repeat it to anyone.
Well, I think you've covered the journalism part, but I do want to say something that I witnessed that made me feel better after seeing how horribly the federal response was to Katrina. In 2021, I was in LaPlace, and I lived there, and it took a direct hit from Hurricane Ida. They had Black Hawk helicopters on the ground the next morning. They had food there the next morning. They masked everything there. No one went a day without water, without food, or anything. It was everything that we had not seen in Katrina. And lest we forget, and I feel it's important that we remember this, 4, 5 days, people, they're not getting any relief. No water, no food. It was all on television. There were helicopters showing people coming out of these grocery stores. Why was the response of so many people and so many of the people in the administration not to see that for what it was, which was human beings trying to keep their loved ones alive. Why was their take from those pictures lawlessness?
Can I say something about that?
Sure.
Our Katrina coverage was a technological plateau also. For the first few days, we couldn't publish a newspaper. And so we would have been completely out of business had it not been that we had a toe in digital journalism by that time. And I think one of the lessons of Katrina for us was the multi-platform journalism that we take for granted now. When John Pope talked about blogging, when you saw the various ways we tried to get digital images and stories out, it was a proving ground for the digital age that we're in now.
This is one quick thought that I've shared with a lot of journalists along the way about Katrina coverage, but it applies to just the citizenry at large, and that is, when you think about things like this in Katrina in hindsight and trying to prepare for the next big thing, is that I try to think of the worst thing possible that could happen to my city in my area, and then prepare for that the best way I can, to be ready to spring into action, to do the right thing, all those things. That's number one. Number two, realize that I can't possibly imagine the worst thing that could possibly happen in our city. And be ready and willing and able to improvise. And the improv, the improv, I think, is what saved us, is being able to swivel and change and invent. I mean, we left the paper without the masthead to build the front page with, and they created that. And we were doing that all over everything we were doing, inventing new ways to get around. So.
Well, unless anyone forget the technical differences, we filed with dial-up modems, 14,000K modems. And you didn't just press a button and you're magically on the internet. You had to go in and put in these elaborate modem strings that if you didn't put every one of them in there just right, you would not get mail. You would not be able to file your pictures. And since all our servers were on site at the Picayune, we didn't even know when we left how we were going to file our pictures. I think we ended up sending emails to Andrew Boyd in your email accounts, Yahoo accounts.
No, we set up the Yahoo accounts for photographers.
And
it was a repository that was kept at the Newhouse Bureau in Washington, D.C.
That's right.
So everything was sent there, so we can all get our stuff back.
Did you all hear that? Could you repeat that? That was fascinating to me, how you had to get your photos done.
I mean, the photographers, how they got photos back, I don't know, it would take 4 minutes a picture to get over to us at the lowest possible resolution.
If we didn't lose the line.
You didn't lose the line.
Grief, I remember the Leafax where it was, what were we talking about?
I'll take it back.
Well, we set up, for the photographers, we had set up Google at the time, not Google, Yahoo had free accounts and stuff like that. I said, everybody set up a free Yahoo account. We'll call it T-Pic Storm or something like that. Everybody send your photos there, and it's gonna go up to Washington, D.C. for the Newhouse News Service, which is the owners of the newspaper. And so that was the repository. Everything was sent there, and then anybody that wanted photos and stuff like that, that needed it for stories and stuff like that, for paper and stuff like that, would just drop it from there. It took forever to get up there, but if we hadn't thought about that, we would have been dead in the water because, there was no way they could send photos to the newspaper anymore. So we had to set up something so everybody had a chance to send it to the same place, just like we had at the newspaper to our archive. You just file it into the computer and there it was. And, but getting those photos there was remarkable. I just don't know how they did it at the time. It's crazy.
Wow. Well, I wish we had time for more questions, but I think I've pretty much run out of time. Does anybody have any parting thoughts? Any lessons that you learned that you could share with us in a sentence or two about the legacy of Katrina?
Ask tough questions. And keep asking tough questions.
Don't ever lose sight of the humanity of the people that you're covering.
Journalism can be a lifeline in a crisis situation, and it's important.
What Jarvis said.
Okay, we could probably go on. I see one hand raised.
I don't want us to leave here this evening without remembering that it was the work that they did that won them the 2 Pulitzer Prizes. I think it's important to remember that these were real people doing incredible things, and they probably should have gotten 10 prizes instead of just 2.
Absolutely. I echo everything you just said, that these journalists were one of the under unimaginable circumstances. You've heard their stories. And to be able to do the work they did under the circumstances that they had to survive to do this work, it's nothing short of amazing. So I admire you and I thank you. There's another question.
I have a comment, not a question, a statement. I applaud journalists. As a former first responder, you all can actually be classified as first responders in critical situations. I don't think the general public views you all as first responders, but it's in critical situations. In this situation, you all were first responders.
Thank you. Thank you. So with that, Michael, do you have any parting words?
I think it would be foolish to follow up with so much very intense, very profound commentary. Thank you all for showing up. Thank you for our panelists. Thank you for the Ogden School for hosting us, to the Reilly Center and Manship staff. We hope you all have an easier time in the traffic going home than you had getting here. Thank you, and especially, Lisa, thank you and your students for your leadership. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
See you later. Oh, that's okay.